Hello, everyone. This week, we're going to take a look at Kingdom Protista. Earlier in the semester, we identified the 5 kingdoms of life for which all living things can be classified. We talked about animals, plants, fungi, Protista, and Monera as our 5 kingdoms of life. Today, we're going to take a look at Kingdom Protista. Right away, we should understand that Protista are small unicellular organisms that have a nucleus, thereby making them eukaryotic organisms. All right, so let us take a look here at Kingdom Protista.
What does this giant kelp, a single-cell euglena, slime mold, and paramecium all have in common? They would all be found in Kingdom Protista. Protists are an interesting kingdom of life. You may have heard that Kingdom Protista is the junk drawer kingdom. Kind of like the drawer at home that you have a little bit of everything in it. Let me help explain why. You will find single-cell organisms like diatoms, multicellular organisms that practice photosynthesis like sea lettuce, and a single-cell organism like paramecium. If you have a eukaryotic organism and it is not a plant, animal, or fungi, it is classified as a protist. All protists have the following common characteristics. They are eukaryotic, which means that genetic material is found inside a nucleus and they contain membrane-bound organelles. Most prefer an aquatic or moist location. Probably the easiest way to think of protists is a eukaryotic organism that lacks the structures to be classified as a plant, animal, or fungi. This kingdom is so diverse that scientists group protists as plant-like, such as algae, animal-like, such as paramecium, and fungi-like, like this slime mold. I'd like to review 2 characteristics that help you get an understanding of the diversity of this kingdom. Let's first look at movement. Some protists, like ciliates, move using tiny hairs called cilia. Paramecium move this way. Other protists move by oozing along. They use a pseudopod. For example, an amoeba moves this way. And then a euglena are protists that move using a flagellum, which is a tail-like structure. And then some protists don't move, like kelp. And then diatoms just float along. Reproduction. Some protists reproduce asexually, like an amoeba and algae. Slime molds reproduce using spores, which is a type of asexual reproduction. Arcella reproduce by budding. Some protists reproduce both sexually and asexually, like a paramecium. So in summary, if you have an organism with a nucleus and is not a plant, animal, or fungi, then you have a protist. Thanks for watching, and remember, kindness multiplies kindness. Kind to someone today.
All right, so let us continue with Kingdom Protista. All right, so right away, we've identified that these organisms are quite similar. They are different to the point that they cannot be considered a plant, an animal, or a fungi. These are small eukaryotic organisms that are unicellular, and so they do share some similarities with bacteria if you just want to think about the single-celled organism, okay? These are one of the early groups of organisms that have been identified on Earth. These are small, tiny, microscopic organisms that can cause disease, and they can also be parasites. So these are characteristics that are quite similar to bacteria. I know we've all identified various diseases that are caused by bacteria. Well, we have this same situation here happening with organisms in this Protista kingdom, and they are also some that are parasites. Okay, So they are quite similar to bacteria in terms of their overall structure and the simple cell type. All right. In terms of some differences from bacteria, again, these are eukaryotic organisms, so they're not going to have a nucleus. They typically live in a moist, watery environment. Their habitat is a little bit different there. They generally live as individual cells, and protists vary greatly in their appearance and function, as we will see throughout these next several slides. So in terms of categorizing protists, we can categorize them as either animal-like protist, plant-like protist, and fungus-like protists. All right, so let us take a moment to walk through these classifications and some unique characteristics of these varying types of protists. Again, we're talking about organisms that cannot be considered to be an actual plant, animal, or fungus. So we use the term animal-like, plant-like, and fungus-like. Okay, so animal-like protist. This term protozoan means first animal. As with animals, these are going to be organisms that contain a nucleus. It's going to lack the cell wall, right? Which is what we saw when we compared the plant and animal cell. These are heterotrophic organisms, okay? And most of them can move on their own. So we'll see some mechanisms of movement for these types of organisms. And so these are going to be features of our animal-like protist. There are 4 groups of animal-like protists that you should be familiar with, okay? We have the sarcodines, the ciliates, the flagellates, and the sporozoans, all right? I would like you to be able to identify these 4 groups of animal-like protists and some distinguishing features of each group. Sarcodines, ciliates, flagellates, and sporozoans. All right, so the sarcodines, let's start with this first group of animal-like protists. They have pseudopods. This term pseudopod means false feet. These pseudopods are the mechanism for which these organisms are able to move and have locomotion, okay? These pseudopods are basically an extension of the cell membrane and cytoplasm, and they stick out and they just kind of look like false feet sticking out from the cytoplasm of these organisms, okay? So they are used for both movement and capturing food. Many of these sarcodines are going to contain shells, and these shells form limestone, marble, or chalk that you'll see very hard structures in these organisms. One type of sarcodine is the amoeba. All right, this is the most familiar sarcodine. You've probably heard about the amoeba before. These amoeba have these false feet that stick out and allow for these organisms to move. Okay, they don't have any defined shape. They just kind of look like blobs here. All right, they do have contractile vacuoles that controls how much water are inside of these organisms. And they also contain food vacuoles where food is contained and digested. So again, these are some features of the amoeba. They do contain pseudopods. They lack any definite shape, okay? But they have some contractile vacuoles and food vacuoles present. Amoebas are a type of animal-like protist that reproduce asexually. Right? Remember, we distinguished asexual reproduction as a form of reproduction that only requires a single parent. So amoebas reproduce via asexual reproduction using binary fission, okay? Where the individual genetic material is going to be duplicated and 2 new daughter organisms will be created. Amoebas are responsive. They respond to their environment, which we identify very early on as a characteristic of life, and they are typically sensitive to light and chemicals. So again, this image right here shows us another type of amoeba, where there's no true defined shape for this organism, but we do see the presence of several different pseudopods sticking out from this organism. And these are going to be methods of motility and movement. So another group of animal-like protists are the ciliates, right? The ciliates are going to be characterized by the presence of cilia on the outside of their cells, right? These cilia are going to be these tiny hair-like projections that are also used for movement. They're used to gather food, as fillers for responding to stimuli, and so forth. And so right away, we see a difference here in terms of the amoeba with the ciliates. This group has these tiny hair-like projections protruding from the organism, and it is the cilia that's going to give these organisms the ability to move. Another type is the paramecium. Paramecium also contains these cilia. You can see these tiny hair-like projections protruding out from this entire cell. Okay, so it has this pellicle wall present. It looks a bit slippery. All right, so this paramecium, you're going to see the presence of this pellicle, which is an outer covering, if you will, or this outer wall, creating this barrier around this organism. It has oral grooves that are kind of like a mouth that's going to help to take in. This gullet holds foods in place. It's also got food vacuoles that are present to digest food. There are anal pores present to facilitate the removal of waste products from the cell. These parameciums are going to contain 2 contractile vacuoles and 2 nuclei. And we can see the presence of these nuclei here in this image, okay? It reproduces by either binary fission or conjugation. All right, so that's the paramecium. Another type of animal-like protist is the flagellates. Okay, these flagellates are going to be characterized by the presence of a flagellum. Okay, these organisms can have one or more flagellum present, and this flagella is characterized as a long whip-like structure that is also used for movement. Okay. These flagellates are typically going to inhabit animals. They can live in symbiosis with these animals, which is a close relationship where at least one person benefits. So it's not exactly the same as a parasitic relationship. So we see some flagellates living in symbiotic relationships or mutualistic relationships where both parties benefit. Okay, again, distinct from a parasitic protozoan. Okay, now our sporozoans, these are all going to be parasites, and by definition, a parasite is an organism that requires a host in order to survive. And so in this case, we've got these sporozoans that live on and feed on the cells of these organisms for which they parasitize. Okay, so most of them are able to form spores, which are tiny reproductive cells, and they can pass from one host to another. Okay, their host can be animals, mosquitoes, ticks, humans. There are many different parasitic hosts for these sporozoans, right? One of the most notable sporozoans that come to mind are the that causes a major human disease are the plasmodium that causes malaria. Okay, so those are our animal-like protists. I want you to be familiar with the 4 types of animal-like protists and some characteristics of each of them. The sporozoans, as I said, are going to all be parasites, and they will require a host in order to survive. They can also produce spores. All right, so let us take a look at our plant-like protist. All right, so like algae. All right, these organisms can be unicellular or multicellular. They typically form colonies, which are going to be groups of these unicellular protists. They can move on their own. These are going to be autotrophic organisms, which means that they can make their own food from simple materials using light energy. So this process of photosynthesis we see in algae. All right. 70% of Earth's oxygen is actually produced by these plant-like protists. All right. So they have various pigments that are going to have that are going to be responsible for the color that we see in these organisms. And there are multiple colors or pigments that can be present depending on the type of algae. So there are 6 groups of plant-like protists. Okay. We have our euglenoids, diatoms, dinoflagellates, red algae, green algae, and brown algae. Okay, these are all types of plant-like protists. All right, so we're thinking about characteristics of the plant. All right, these are going to be photosynthetic organisms that contain pigment. All right, let's start with our euglenoids. Euglenoids are green unicellular and they typically live in fresh water. As I said before, they are autotrophs naturally, but can be heterotrophs under certain conditions. These organisms will contain a flagella, but can be very sensitive to lots of light. They do contain a chloroplast, which is the site of photosynthesis, and this pellicle, which we mentioned before as that extracellular wall that surrounds the cell. Okay, so those are our euglenoids. Another group of plant-like protists are our diatoms, right? Again, these are unicellular organisms, and they're in quite a bit of abundance. There are over 10,000 living species of diatoms found in various aquatic environments, okay? They kind of appear like a glass with this glass cell wall surrounding it. Okay, the diatom, their diatoms on Earth, they're coarse powder that comes from dead diatoms. Okay, so this micrograph right here shows you the very distinct appearance and structure of these diatoms. All right, the dinoflagellates, again, these are unicellular organisms. They're going to have a cell wall. They contain 2 flagella. And when they're moving, you sort of see sort of a spin-like movement, okay? They have various pigments, so they kind of appear colorful. In this micrograph right here, we can see an array of colors, if you will, for these dinoflagellates. They can glow in the dark, and they are organisms that are responsible for red tide that we see. So these are our dinoflagellates, all right? Other plant-like protists, we have red algae, right? Multicellular seaweeds. They live in deep ocean waters. They're used for ice cream and hair conditioner, and they're also used as food in some parts of the world. Okay, so this is our red algae, all right? Then we have green algae. This is one of the ones that you're probably most familiar with. Most of the green algae here are unicellular. Some of them can form colonies, all right? There are also multicellular algae that exist. They can live in both freshwater and saltwater, and on land in damp habitats, damp places. So they're very closely related to green plants. So again, we're thinking about those characteristics of plants, right? So green algae are very similar. They're photosynthetic organisms, all right? Brown algae, often called seaweed. We've probably seen these before when you've gone to the beach. They can contain brown, green, yellow, orange, and black pigments. Okay, this is a very nice image here of brown algae. They can attach to rocks. They have air bladders, giant kelp you've probably seen before, and they're also used in food production as food thickeners. Okay. So those are our plant-like protists, all right? Let's take a look here at our fungus-like protists, all right? these are going to be heterotrophs, right? They're going to have some type of external absorption for nutrition, all right, as heterotrophs. They do have cell walls, okay? Many have flagella and are able to move at some point in their lives. All right, so there are three different types of fungus-like protists: slime molds, water, and downy moles, okay? They reproduce by producing spores, right? These are tiny cells that are able to grow into new organisms. So we have fungus-like spores, fungus-like protists that can reproduce via spore production, okay? Jot down our three types of fungus-like spores, all right? Slime moles, water, and downy moles, all right? Water and downy moles. These are going to be organisms that live in water or some type of moist habitat, okay? They're tiny threads that kind of look like fuzz on top of the surface, all right? They definitely attack food crops and they are responsible for the Irish potato famine that existed. I certainly encourage you to go on and read a little bit more about this unfortunate event here, the Irish potato famine that was caused by these organisms, okay? So slime molds, these organisms reproduce by fruiting bodies, all right? These fruiting bodies contain spores. If you take a quick look at them, they might look like an amoeba, but later on we'll see that they are molds. They typically live in moist, shady places. They typically feed on bacteria and other microorganisms. So these are our slime molds, all right? These are our fungus-like protists, all right? Let us stop here for this presentation.